From the very moment Marcelito Pomoy stepped onto the AGT Champions stage, something felt different, almost electric. The audience, already familiar with his reputation as the man with two voices, leaned forward with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. But even then, no one expected the magnitude of what they were about to witness. The stage lights dimmed until only a single spotlight remained, shining directly on Marcelito. He stood calm, humble, and focused, his hands clasped in front of him, eyes gently scanning the audience. Despite the massive pressure, he carried a quiet confidence, the kind that comes only from someone who has walked through struggle, survived it, and learned to convert it into pure artistry. As the music began, a haunting orchestral intro filled the arena. The judges straightened in their seats. Something was coming, everyone could feel it. Marcelito inhaled softly, and then, with absolute precision, released his first note. It wasn't just flawless, it was otherworldly. A shockwave passed through the crowd. Gasps filled the air. People looked at one another as if asking, did we really just hear that? His voice, angelic, pure, unbelievably controlled, echoed through the massive auditorium with perfect clarity. Simon Cowell's eyes widened instantly. Heidi Klum's lips parted in disbelief. Even Alicia Dixon, who had heard countless extraordinary singers, raised her eyebrows as if witnessing something entirely new. Then came the moment that changed everything. Without warning, Marcelito transitioned from his female soprano voice into a deeply rich male tenor, effortlessly, seamlessly, as if two people were singing inside one body. The camera cut to the audience, where people could be seen covering their mouths, shaking their heads, or whispering, "No way, no way." It wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. As he continued, the intensity built. Each shift between voices became more powerful, more shocking, more precise. It was like watching a magician perform a trick that defied the laws of reality, but this wasn't a trick. It was raw talent, honed through years of practice, hardship, and determination. Backstage, even the crew couldn't contain themselves. Some leaned out from behind the curtains, others stopped working entirely just to watch. A sound technician whispered, "I've never heard anything like this, ever." When Marcelito reached the midpoint of the performance, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation, in the middle of the song. Very few artists in AGT history had ever received such a response. But Marcelito wasn't done. He stood firmly planted, eyes closed, pouring his soul into every note, as if channeling something divine. By the time the last note of Scene 1 faded, the room was transformed. The judges were speechless. The audience was on fire. And Marcelito Pomoy had once again proven why he remains a global phenomenon. The world didn't just witness a performance. They witnessed the impossible becoming real. The moment Marcelito Pomoy entered the second half of his performance, the energy inside the AGT Champions arena shifted dramatically. What had started as a wave of shock and admiration in Scene 1 now intensified into pure disbelief. Every eye in the building, judges, audience, crew, was locked on him. They weren't just watching, they were witnessing history unfold right in front of them. As Marcelito transitioned into the next section of the song, the orchestra swelled behind him, building tension like a rising storm. And then, with a breath so subtle it was barely visible, Marcelito shifted from his rich male tenor to an ethereal female soprano again. But this time, the transition was so clean, so impossibly smooth, that the judges reacted instantly. The camera captured Simon Cowell in his rawest form, leaning back, eyes wide, hands lifting slowly toward his face. It was a rare sight. Simon, the man known for his unshakable composure, looked completely disarmed. Next to him, Heidi placed both hands on her chest, her lips forming a silent, "Oh my God." Alicia Dixon leaned forward, her eyes darting between the stage and the audience, as if silently asking, "Is this really happening live?" And it wasn't just the judges. A wave of noise erupted from the crowd, shouts, cheers, spontaneous screams of excitement. But then something even more shocking happened. As Marcelito executed a near-perfect dual-voice phrase, the arena suddenly went silent for half a second. Not because the audience wasn't impressed, but because they couldn't believe what they had just heard. In that half-second of stunned silence, you could feel the astonishment vibrating in the air. A producer backstage shouted, "What?" so loudly that it faintly bled into the stage microphones. One of the camera operators raised his eyebrows, his jaw dropping slightly. Even the security guards stationed along the aisles looked up from their posts, unable to hide their shock. Marcelito, unaware of the chaos he was causing, stood steady, eyes closed, fully immersed in the music. His face carried the expression of someone who wasn't performing for fame or applause, but performing from the soul. Then came the high-risk section. With total control, he layered the female soprano over a powerful male bass note, a technique so rare and so technically complex that even professional vocal coaches later described it as nearly impossible for a single human being. Alicia Dixon whispered to herself, "That can't be real, it just can't." The audience rose to their feet again, the second mid-song standing ovation. People waved their hands in the air, some cried, others recorded with shaky hands, trying to capture the moment. By the time Marcelito closed the second act of his performance, the judges were left speechless. Not one of them pressed their buzzer, not one of them moved, not one of them blinked. They were witnessing a once-in-a-generation talent doing something that defied logic, science, and expectations. As Marcelito Pomoy approached the final act of his AGT Champions performance, the tension inside the arena reached a level that could almost be touched. Everyone knew something extraordinary was coming, but no one, not even the judges who had seen thousands of performances, expected what Marcelito was about to unleash. The orchestra softened, creating a suspenseful hush over the hall. The lights narrowed around Marcelito until he stood in a glowing circle at the center of the stage. His posture grew stronger, his breathing steadier. You could see the transformation, the switch from performer to legend in the making. And then, he began. With a sudden rise in volume, Marcelito launched into the final high soprano section of the song. His voice soared like a beam of light, cutting through the air with impossible clarity. The audience gasped together, a unified sound of disbelief. Cameras zoomed in on Simon, whose eyes widened once more. Heidi's mouth fell open. Alicia's hand flew straight to her forehead. But that wasn't the real shock. Midway through the final chorus, Marcelito did something no one in the building had ever seen before. Instead of switching between his male and female voices, he layered them, at the same time. His male tenor grounded the performance with power, while his female soprano soared above it like a perfectly tuned violin. It was as if two singers were standing on stage, perfectly synchronized. But there was only one man. The reaction was instantaneous. The audience exploded, screaming, cheering, waving their arms, jumping to their feet. The sound was deafening. People shouted things like, "No way," and, "How is he doing this?" Some looked emotional, their faces overwhelmed by a performance that felt magical. Backstage, there was total chaos. Crew members stopped everything and rushed toward the side curtains to watch. One stagehand put both hands on his head and whispered, "This is unreal, this is literally unreal." Even the sound technicians froze, staring at the monitors like they were witnessing a vocal miracle. And yet, Marcelito wasn't done. With one last breath, he delivered the final note, an impossibly long, perfectly sustained high note that filled the arena like thunder. It was powerful, clean, controlled, and emotional all at once. The moment that note hit, every single person in the building screamed. Confetti cannons fired automatically from the stage rafters. Lights spiraled across the arena. The audience roared so loudly that the judges' voices could barely be heard. Simon stood up so fast his chair slid backward. Heidi clapped above her head, tears in her eyes. Alicia pressed both hands together as if praying. As the music stopped, Marcelito opened his eyes, calm, humble, overwhelmed. The audience was still standing. No one sat down, not a single soul. Simon finally spoke, shaking his head with a stunned smile. "That should not be possible, but you just did it. That was beyond anything we've ever had on this stage." The impossible finale had happened. And Marcelito Pomoy had just sealed his place in AGT history forever.